The night my home disappeared, I stood barefoot across the street, staring at the flames that had swallowed everything I owned. The firefighters were still spraying water onto what was left of the roof, but deep down I already knew there was nothing left to save. My childhood photos, gone. The engagement ring my late grandmother had left me, gone. Every memory I'd spent years building, reduced to ash in less than an hour as the cold wind cut through my smoke-covered clothes. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. There was only one place I thought I could turn. My family. I called my mother first. She answered after 3 rings. "Mom," my voice cracked. "My house burned down. I don't have anywhere to go. I just need a place to stay for a few days." There was silence. Then she sighed. "You're 30 years old. Figure it out." I thought she hadn't understood. I lost everything. "So, that's what insurance is for." Before I could answer, she hung up. I stood frozen, staring at the screen. Maybe Dad would understand. He didn't. "The insurance company will pay you," he said coldly. "We're not opening our home because you couldn't protect yours." Click. I felt something inside me break. Not because I had lost my house. Because in the worst moment of my life, my own parents treated me like I was a complete stranger. I spent that night sleeping in my car outside a grocery store parking lot. Wrapped in a damp blanket a firefighter had handed me, I kept telling myself this was only temporary. I had insurance. Eventually everything would be okay. At least, that's what I believed. The next morning, the insurance adjuster called. "Good news," she said. "Your claim has already been processed." I frowned. "Processed?" "Yes, the payment was released this morning." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. "Released? To who?" There was another pause. "I'm sorry," she replied carefully. "According to our records, the funds were transferred to the authorized account listed on your policy." My heart began pounding. "There has to be a mistake," I whispered, because I had never received a single dollar. And at that moment, I had no idea that losing my home wasn't the worst thing my family had done to me. It was only the beginning. I drove straight to the insurance office with my hands, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. Every mile I kept repeating the same sentence in my head. There has to be a mistake. When I arrived, the claims manager invited me into her office. She looked uncomfortable before she even opened my file. "I'm sorry you're going through this," she said quietly. "But according to our records, the payment was deposited into the account listed as your emergency beneficiary." I blinked. "Emergency? Beneficiary?" She turned her monitor toward me. There, in black and white, was an account number I didn't recognize. Below it was a familiar name. Margaret Collins. My mother. I felt the blood drain from my face. "My mother isn't on my policy," I said. "She never has been." The claims manager frowned. "Our records show the beneficiary information was updated 2 weeks before the fire." 2 weeks. Exactly 2 weeks. I knew I hadn't changed anything. Someone else had. Trying to stay calm, I asked for every document connected to my claim. She hesitated but eventually printed everything. As I flipped through the pages, one signature stopped me cold. It looked like mine, but it wasn't. Someone had forged my signature. Whoever did it had practiced carefully, but they missed one small detail. For years, I had signed my last name with a tiny upward stroke on the final letter. The signature on the form ended with a straight line. Almost nobody would notice, but I did. "This isn't my signature," I whispered. The manager immediately looked concerned. "If you're claiming fraud, we'll have to freeze the case and open an internal investigation." I nodded. "Please do." As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed. It was my younger brother, Ethan. He hadn't called me in months. I answered. Before I could say hello, he laughed. "So, heard about your little accident." "It wasn't an accident," I replied. "Oh well," he chuckled. "At least Mom says the insurance money will finally be put to good use." My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't told anyone about the insurance payment. Not even the insurance company had confirmed it outside that office. "So how did Ethan know?" I stayed silent. Realizing he'd said too much, he quickly changed his tone. Never mind. Forget I called." He hung up. I stared at the phone. Only 3 people knew about the money. The insurance company, my mother, and now, my brother. That wasn't a coincidence. For the first time, I stopped asking whether my family had stolen my insurance money. Instead, a far more terrifying question entered my mind. Did they know my house was going to burn down before it ever happened? I couldn't sleep that night. My brother's words kept replaying in my mind. At least Mom says the insurance money will finally be put to good use. That wasn't a guess. He knew. The next morning, I drove back to the ruins of my home. Yellow police tape still surrounded the property, and the smell of smoke lingered in the air. While the fire investigators worked inside, I noticed one section of the security cameras mounted on my neighbor's garage. Mrs. Reynolds, an elderly widow who had lived next door for nearly 20 years, stepped outside. "I'm so sorry about your house," she said softly. Then she hesitated. "I almost forgot. My security cameras were recording that night." My heart skipped. "Do they still have the footage?" "I think so." Minutes later, we were sitting in her living room watching the recording. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then, at 11:43 p.m., a black SUV slowly stopped across the street. A man wearing a dark hoodie stepped out. He walked toward my house carrying what looked like a small gas can. My pulse raced. The man unlocked my front door. Unlocked it. There was no forced entry. He disappeared inside for less than 2 minutes before walking back to the SUV. Exactly 7 minutes later, the first flames appeared in my living room window. I could barely breathe. Then the hood shifted as the man looked toward the camera. Only for a second, but it was enough. I recognized the silver watch on his wrist. It wasn't just any watch. It was the engraved retirement gift my father had received from his company 5 years earlier. The same watch he wore every single day. I froze. "No." Mrs. Reynolds looked at me. "You know him?" I couldn't answer. Because if I was right, my own father had been inside my house just minutes before it burned. Trying to stay calm, I copied the video onto a flash drive and left without calling anyone, not even the police. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof no lawyer could destroy. That evening, I checked my email and found something I had completely forgotten about. Months earlier, after a series of arguments with my family over money, I had installed a smart home system connected to cloud storage. Smoke had destroyed the devices, but not the recordings automatically uploaded online. With trembling hands, I logged into my account. Hundreds of video files appeared. Most showed ordinary days, until I opened one recorded the afternoon before the fire. The camera pointed toward my kitchen. The front door opened. My parents walked inside. They thought the cameras were disabled because I had told everyone the system was broken weeks earlier. They were wrong. I watched in stunned silence as my mother handed my father a folder. He pulled out insurance papers. Then she smiled and said the words that changed everything. "Once the money comes through, nobody will ever believe it wasn't an accident." I wasn't imagining it anymore. It wasn't fraud. It wasn't betrayal. It was a carefully planned crime. And now, I finally had the evidence they never knew existed. I spent the entire night making 3 copies of the evidence. One stayed in my possession. One went into a safety deposit box at my bank. And the third was delivered to my attorney before sunrise. For the first time since the fire, I wasn't afraid. I was prepared. The next morning, my parents called. Not to ask how I was doing, not to apologize. My mother sounded almost cheerful. "We've been thinking," she said. "Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? We should talk about your future." I already knew why. The insurance company had frozen the payment after I reported the forged documents. They were desperate to find out how much I knew. That evening, I walked into my parents' dining room with my phone quietly recording in my pocket. My father smiled as if nothing had happened. "We're family," he said. "Let's stop fighting." Then my mother slid a document across the table. "If you sign this," she said, "we'll help you get back on your feet." I looked down. It was a settlement agreement. In exchange for a small payment, I would give up any future claim to the insurance money. I couldn't believe it. Even after everything they had done, they still thought I was the easiest person in the room to manipulate. I smiled. Then I pushed the paper back toward them. I already know where the money went. The room went silent. My brother's face turned pale. My father tried to laugh. "You've been under a lot of stress." I placed the flash drive on the table. "I have the forged documents." Another silence. "I have the security footage." No one spoke. "And I have the cloud recording of both of you, planning this before my house burned down." My mother's hand began to shake. My father reached for the flash drive. But before he could touch it, there was a loud knock at the front door. 2 detectives walked inside. Behind them came an investigator from the insurance company's fraud unit. One detective looked directly at my parents. "Margaret Collins." "Robert Collins, You're under arrest on suspicion of insurance fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and arson. My mother burst into tears. My father kept repeating, "This is a misunderstanding." It wasn't. Weeks later, forensic investigators confirmed that the fire had been deliberately started using an accelerant. The forged paperwork, security footage, cloud recordings, and financial records told the same story. My parents and my brother were convicted. The insurance company restored my claim, issued the full payment directly to me, and even covered additional living expenses because of the fraud investigation. A year later, I stood on the porch of my newly built home. It wasn't bigger than the one I had lost, but it felt stronger, not because of the walls, because it was built on truth instead of lies. The fire had taken my house. My family's greed had taken my trust. But in the end, the one thing they never expected, the proof they believed didn't exist, became the reason. Justice finally caught up with them. And that was something no amount of stolen money could ever buy. If you want more interesting stories. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.